What was the weirdest thing the weird kid did at your school? Story 1. When I was in 4th grade, our class had a sleepover at school. We had a pool, and naturally everyone went swimming. After swimming, it was time to change. Most of us just grabbed our clothes and headed to the bathroom to change, except for one kid. He decided to take off his swim trunks in the bathroom, then walk butt naked in front of everyone, boys and girls alike, down the hall to one of the classrooms. He planned to change there in front of all of us. Everyone saw him, and it was like the walk of shame. For weeks after, the other kids kept making fun of him and calling him names. Story 2. There was a boy in our school who had an unusual habit of driving around the basketball courts, following the lines as if he were on an imaginary bus. He would stop to let people on or off the bus, mimicking the door opening and closing. He wouldn't let anyone on or off unless they waited for his signal. We played along, walking in a line behind him, and it was surprisingly fun. "Salutations, Ben the bus driver," we'd call out. I hope Ben achieved his dreams. It was nice of the other kids to play along. It probably was fun for everyone involved, knowing how imaginative kids can be. Story 3. There was this peculiar kid in my class who was generally all right, but occasionally did some inexplicable things. One day, he opened his lunchbox during class and without any warning, threw the contents straight onto the overhead ceiling fan. Whatever he had in there was something liquidy and greenish. As soon as it hit the spinning fan, it splashed everywhere, on us, the walls, the board. The poor teacher got the worst of it, with the green mess raining down all over his face. As a punishment, the entire class was made to clean the classroom. Surprisingly, none of us were mad at him. Instead, we all had a real good laugh about it. I had initially thought everyone would be furious with him, but I was proven wrong. The incident turned into a funny memory we all shared, and even the teacher eventually laughed about it. Story 4. There was this one kid at my school who wore cheap button-down collar shirts every day. He always buttoned the top button and let the shirt billow around him as he walked, convinced that by doing this, he would start a trend and become popular. He was forever alone on that hill, determined to make his style catch on. Knowing how kids are, there was a 50-50th chance that this could have worked. It didn't pan out for him, but I can't help but wonder if somewhere out there's another kid whose quirky fashion choice actually catches on and makes them a trendsetter. Story 5. My best friend had a pottery class with a very strange kid who had a penchant for running like Sonic down the hallways and jumping over trash cans. Sometimes, other kids would line up trash cans just to see him fly over them, which he somehow managed to do with impressive ease. During one pottery class, they were supposed to make a pot, vase, or anything they wanted. This kid, however, took the anything part a bit too far. He decided to make an actual spear. Miraculously, it somehow got past the teacher's notice and was never caught. He managed to get it baked in the kiln and hardened. Then, in class, he began sharpening it. One day, the teacher finally noticed him sharpening the spear and tried to take it away. But the kid went full caveman SpongeBob on everyone, brandishing the spear and stabbing at people to keep them away. Chaos ensued as he ran down the hallways, chased by teachers and the school resource officer, SRO. Thankfully, no one was injured, but the image of him running down the hallways with a spear in hand is one that my friend and I will never forget. Story 6. In elementary school, I was the weird kid. I didn't talk until I was 5 years old, and even then, my vocabulary was limited to about 20 words. I only spoke when spoken to, and this lasted for about 3 to 4 years. When I did start talking, I had a memorable encounter with the local genius, a 10-year-old prodigy who lived in our neighborhood and had graduated at an astonishingly young age, something like 12. One day, he walked up to me and said, "The answer to every question can be found through observing." And then he walked off, leaving me to ponder his words. I knew this kid was much smarter than me, so I took his advice very seriously. Unfortunately, a bit too literally. I interpreted his message as, the answer to every question is observing. From that point on, my behavior took a strange turn. Whenever anyone asked me anything, my response was always the same, observing. What's 2 times 2 inches? Observing. What do you want for tea? Observing. What's on the TV? Observing. Why are you such a stupid kid? Observing. Tagged. My parents were beside themselves with worry. My school called them multiple times, and eventually a big meeting was held to discuss my peculiar behavior. It was decided that I needed therapy because for nearly a solid year, observing was the only thing I ever said to anyone. It was a challenging time for my family and me, but looking back, it's a somewhat humorous reminder of how literally I took that genius neighbor's advice. Story 7. There was this weird kid in my elementary school who was a self-proclaimed alien. One time, while we were waiting for the bus, she looked at me with a serious expression and said, "On my planet, we eat people like you," before proceeding to bite me. It was bizarre and a little unsettling at the time. Fast forward to high school, and we somehow became friends. During lunch breaks in the quad, she would give me massages. Looking back on it now, I can't help but laugh at the thought that she might have been tenderizing me all along. Story 8. I dated the weird kid in high school and continued to date him for a few years afterward. The weirdest thing he did was try to date his cousin while we were still together. To add to that, he also ate grass and had bizarre conversations with his friends about something they called the flesh planet. Those years were miserable for me. To elaborate, she wasn't his biological cousin. She was his cousin by marriage until a divorce. Despite this, they were raised as cousins, and he introduced her to me and everyone else as his cousin. His whole family knew and supported this relationship, treating me as if I were the crazy one for being upset. His father, in particular, wanted them to be together so they could have white babies. I should mention that I am black, as is my mom. Meanwhile, the rest of his family was obsessed with the idea of us having beautiful mixed babies. At that time, I had serious low self-esteem, low standards, and abandonment issues due to trauma in my life. Everyone, including our teachers, questioned why I was still with him. But I tried hard not to judge people, even when they gave me every reason to. Looking back, it's clear how much I struggled with my self-worth during those years. Story 9. There was this kid in my high school math class who was unlike anyone else. He always wore a trench coat, no matter the weather, and carried an enormous backpack. He was in a grade below us, but he was incredibly smart, much smarter than anyone in our so-called dumb class. Despite his odd appearance and mannerisms, I respected him and would stand up for him if anyone tried to bully him. He appreciated it and would let me cheat off his math tests. But if he caught anyone else peeking, he'd start hissing and barking like an animal. I found it amusing and thought he was pretty cool in his own way. Then one day, he just vanished. The school went into a lockdown, but when it was over, he never came back to class. Years later, I saw him again. "Hey buddy, what's up? One day you were just gone," I said. He replied, "Yeah, they expelled me because they thought I was a danger." I was stunned. "Wow, that's crazy. But that's BS, man. Don't worry, you would have been safe," I told him. He looked at me with a straight face and said, "Thanks." I thanked him and went on my way, still processing what he had said. I still see him from time to time and always say hello. His words linger with me, a strange mix of unsettling and reassuring. It's one of those memories that always makes me pause and reflect on how unpredictable people can be. Story 10. He wasn't the weird kid, but one of the craziest things that happened at my high school involved him. It was the younger brother of one of my good friends. My friend was a grade higher than I was, and when he graduated, his younger brother was a freshman. As a senior, if you only needed a few credits to graduate, you weren't required to stay the whole day. I usually left school around 11:30 or 11:45 each day. One particular day, I was driving home to get ready to go to work with my dad when I got a phone call from my mom. She was freaking out, almost crying and hyperventilating. Once she calmed down, she explained to me that there had been a shots-fired call at the school shortly after I left. I found out that my friend's younger brother had been dumped by his girlfriend the day before. He said he was going to do something stupid so that she would feel responsible. The next day, he brought his brother's pistol to school and emptied the clip into the school's sports trophy case. Thankfully, no one was hurt. I'm not quite sure what happened to him afterward, but I know he had to stay in a psychiatric ward for almost 2 years. I don't think any criminal charges were filed against him, since he didn't harm anyone. But that's the craziest thing that happened at my high school. Even though he wasn't the weird kid, it's definitely a weird kid thing to do. High school breakups can be intense, and while it's fortunate he didn't turn the gun on anyone else, just shooting the trophy case was still a shocking incident. Story 11. My old art teacher used to regale our class with stories about the weird things kids did in her previous job as an English teacher at the juvenile court school. All the kids there had their issues, but one particular kid stood out to her. He was assigned to her, but with a catch. He had to be in solitary confinement to be taught. She was also told he needed constant supervision because he was always trying to escape class and usually succeeded. When she taught him, there was a guard posted at the door, the windows were locked and boarded up, and the door was kept locked. The room contained only his desk, his chair, and her desk, ensuring he couldn't hide anywhere. Apparently, he was quite good at finding places to hide. The first time she taught him in solitary, the room had a closet. The kid went missing, and about 3 hours later, they found him taking a nap at the bottom of the closet. They had missed him the first time they checked there. Another time, the room had no closet or other places to hide. She left the room for something, probably to use the bathroom, and when she returned, the kid was gone. The guard was there the whole time, and the room was basically sealed. There was no way he could have gotten out, and no obvious places he could hide. The school went on lockdown while they searched for him. About 2 hours later, they found him when he pushed away the paneling on the classroom wall and stepped out to casually ask if he could go to the bathroom. This kid had opened up the wall, climbed inside, and hidden there for hours. He might have behavioral issues and not be the best kid, but if he ever needs to hide or become an escape artist, I think this kid has a pretty good shot at it. Story 12. In my freshman year of high school, there was this kid I grew up with who suddenly started wearing homemade chainmail to school. He wore it every single day for all 4 years. He was always a bit odd, but nice enough. We had a few classes together in middle school and bonded over our shared love for some video games, so I felt comfortable asking him why he started wearing chainmail all of a sudden. One day, I approached him and casually asked about his new fashion choice. He launched into a detailed explanation about the defensive benefits of chainmail against both sharp and blunt instruments of harm. For 5 solid minutes, he talked about daggers, pikes, hammers, and even how curved blades like katanas and falchions would struggle against it. I listened, somewhat bemused, and when he finished, I shrugged and said, "Makes sense," before we both went to our respective classes. I didn't know what I expected, but it certainly wasn't a crash course in medieval armor. The idea that he thought I might have been suggesting plate armor instead made me chuckle. I suppose I could have just asked why he wore armor at all, but honestly, I didn't want to ruin his fun. Story 13. There was a guy I knew in high school who had a wild mouse living in his car. It wasn't a pet or anything, just a random mouse that decided to make his car its home. He would intentionally leave food in the back seat for it. At first, I didn't believe him, but one day, when he opened the door, I saw the mouse scurry under the seat. It was a bizarre sight, but it seemed perfectly normal to him. This same guy once wore a full cowsuit to school. It was an outrageous outfit, and it freaked out an autistic kid who had a specific fear of cows. There was a lot of debate among us whether he wore the cowsuit specifically to scare the kid or if he just did it to be weird. His behavior was always unpredictable, so either explanation seemed plausible. Nowadays, he's a youth pastor. It's strange to think about, considering his odd behaviors back in high school. Seeing him in that role now, I can't help but wonder how those eccentricities shaped who he is today. Story 14. Interestingly enough, the weird kid at our school was actually quite well liked. He was on the track team and was an insanely fast distance runner. We were pretty good friends in high school and attended the same summer fine arts camp every year. The funniest thing he ever did was during our freshman year in geometry class. Our teacher was explaining planes and mentioned how a 3-legged table would never wobble because 3 points always form a plane. Cue the weird kid standing up and saying, "Challenge accepted." The next Monday, he dragged a giant table into class. Over the weekend, he had built a table with 3 legs and springs between the flat tabletop and the legs. The result was that if you put a glass on it, it would wobble and fall over. Our teacher found it so hilarious that he kept the table in his classroom for the entire year. Story 15. One day, a boy in our class suddenly ran out, seemingly trying to leave the school. A bunch of teachers gave chase, and we could hear the commotion in the hallways. The door to our class was closed, but it had a small window. Quite a bit later, I looked up and saw him at the window. He just looked at us, licked the window, and then ran off again, with a couple of teachers still in pursuit. It was one of those moments that was both bizarre and hilarious, and it left a lasting impression on all of us. Story 16. I don't know if they were necessarily the weird kid, but there was someone I happened to encounter once during undergrad who definitely made an impression. Our dining hall had a station where you could make your own waffles. It had a container of batter with little plastic cups for you to fill up and pour into the waffle iron. This setup was right next to the bagel station, just for reference. One morning, in between classes, I was prepping a bagel for myself when I noticed two girls at the waffle station. As I was spreading cream cheese, I overheard part of their conversation. One of the girls was saying to her friend, "People think I'm weird, but I just don't get why." Now, this would normally be a totally valid thing to say. However, her statement was immediately undercut by what she did next. She filled up one of the plastic cups with batter and then, to my utter disbelief, proceeded to drink it like it was some sort of waffle-flavored milkshake. She continued her conversation as if she hadn't just done the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. It's been 5 years since that morning, and I'm still in disbelief. Hey, some people eat cookie dough. She drinks waffle batter. I don't want to see any judgment from you cookie dough eaters. Story 17. Back in 1996 to 97, we had a bomb threat at school, and everyone had to gather at the football stadium. Amidst the chaos, one of the special ed kids with Downs started doing the Macarena, and soon the entire school was joining in. It was a bizarre sight, with everyone doing the dance, trying to keep some sense of normalcy. Then, out of nowhere, a kid who always dressed weird ran onto the field with his friend, and they started kissing. This was 1996 to 97, a time when such displays were not common, and it sparked a huge commotion. People were trying to beat them up, and the administrators had to intervene and take them away. Meanwhile, there were still some students desperately trying to keep the Macarena alive. It was an incredibly strange day, one that nobody at school would ever forget. Story 18. There was a kid in our school who genuinely believed he was a Jedi. He'd often be seen meditating or practicing his Force moves, completely immersed in his fantasy world. One time, before gym class, he was meditating in the locker room. One of the big football players started yelling at him, telling him he wasn't a Jedi. Despite the ridicule, he remained unflinching, deeply committed to his role. The saddest part was his last name, Bates. It didn't take long for people to cruelly nickname him Master Bates. Despite the teasing, he never broke character. I actually went to church with him, and during our senior year at a youth gathering, he made a surprising confession to everyone. He admitted that he wasn't actually a Jedi. We were all shocked, not just because of his admission, but because of how much he had committed to the role all those years. It was a moment of vulnerability and honesty that left a lasting impression on all of us. Story 19. There was this girl in our school who, at the age of 14 or 15, would run and gallop around the playground, pretending to be a horse. It was an odd sight for the rest of us, as we felt we were too old for such imaginative play. Fast forward over a decade, and I unexpectedly bumped into her at the hospital. She had pursued a medical degree and was now undergoing surgical training. When I saw her, I couldn't help but ask, "Do you still love horses?" She laughed and said she now owned her own horse. It made sense in a way. As I thought about it, I wondered how I'd feel if I were getting surgery and was told my surgeon used to gallop around pretending to be a horse at 15. Would it make me less comfortable? Maybe, but then again, everyone has their quirks. Story 20. In high school, there was this guy who growled at everyone. No one could get a word out of him, no matter how nice they were. Then one day, he came to school dressed entirely in black. The most striking thing was the massive chain he had around his neck, like one you'd use to anchor a huge boat. We were all curious, so eventually, someone asked him why he wore it. He didn't say anything at first. Then, he suddenly flung the chain off his neck and held it out like a weapon, growling, "That's why." It was the first time anyone had ever heard him speak. Years later, I heard he grew out of that phase and is actually a really cool person now. Story 21. During my final exams, I was seated 2 rows in front and 2 seats to the side of the weird kid. I finished my paper with about 15 minutes to spare and, out of boredom, started looking around the room. My eyes landed on him. He had a styrofoam cup balanced upside down on a pencil, making it look like the pencil was wearing a hat. He was flicking the cup, causing it to spin around on the pencil while silently screaming at it and slightly headbanging. It was as if he was at a silent, heavy metal concert, completely in his own world. The sight was both bizarre and entertaining, adding an unexpected touch of humor to the otherwise tense exam environment. Story 22. In high school, we had an unofficial Harry Potter fan club. When Deathly Hallows was released, a rumor started spreading that Harry dies at the end. While he does, a lot happens afterward that most of the fan club didn't know about. One girl in the club heard about it and, in a state of distress, tried to throw herself off the third story of the school building. We all witnessed it, and two male teachers had to physically pull her away from the window as she screamed, "If Harry is dead, I have no purpose." It was a traumatic scene for everyone involved. She was suspended afterward, and the fan club was disbanded. To this day, I still question why the administration disbanded the club. None of us did anything wrong. We were just passionate fans. Unless the decision came from the students feeling uncomfortable, it seemed unfair to punish us for one person's extreme reaction. Story 23. The weird kid in my school, who was also a friend of mine, had really bad dry scalp during the winter months. To get some relief from the itchiness, he would vigorously rub his hair, which resulted in a significant amount of dead skin accumulating on his desk. One day, as he was doing this, a girl glanced over and loudly exclaimed, "Ew!" Wanting to make a statement, he did something utterly unexpected. He gathered all the dead skin into a line-shaped pile and, mimicking a scene from a movie, snorted it like a massive line of drugs. The classroom fell into stunned silence before he was promptly kicked out of class. The whole incident was both confusing and disturbing. It was one of those moments that you couldn't believe was happening in real life, and it left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it.